It was a Tuesday night, and I was wrapping up the last of my work in the home office. The screen in front of me flickered with final edits I was about to send off, the ticking of the clock on the wall marking the quiet end to a long day. The house was still, except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, reminding me that I hadn't eaten dinner. Honestly, I didn't care much about food at that point. I was just exhausted. Then my phone rang. Jessica. I wasn't expecting her to call. She usually waited until after her shift at the marketing firm to check in, if she even bothered to. But tonight, she called early. Her voice, when I picked up, was too casual, too calm for a Tuesday night. "Hey, babe," she said, her tone smooth like it was a regular conversation. "We need to talk about the company party this Friday." I paused, confused. "The party? What's up with it? I think you should skip this one." She said it so easily, so rehearsed, like she'd said it 100 times before. "Carl's going to be there, the ex-husband. And with everything going on at work, I really need to focus on my career." My chest tightened. Carl, her ex. I hadn't even thought about him in years. It wasn't like they were close. Or at least, that's what she'd led me to believe. But the way she said it, like it was a perfectly normal request, something didn't sit right. "I can stay home if you really want me to," I said, trying to sound supportive. But the words felt hollow. I didn't know why, but something about this felt off. I should have pressed her on it, but I didn't. "Thanks, Steve. I just think it'll be easier, you know?" Her voice lightened as if it was no big deal. I agreed, half listening, then hung up. The moment the call ended, I felt that nagging feeling in my gut again. The tension between us had been building for months. She'd been working later and later, wearing clothes she never used to wear, acting like she didn't want to be around me. I tried to ignore it, to write it off as work stress. But now it didn't seem so simple. I opened my email, needing to clear my head. That's when I saw it. An email from my new employer. My stomach dropped. It was an invitation to the company's celebration. I was listed as the new regional director. They'd promoted me, and they hadn't told Jessica yet. My chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't from confusion. It was something darker. She'd never mentioned it. I'd kept it quiet, sure, but the timing couldn't be more coincidental. I was about to walk right into the middle of a mess, and I didn't know if I was ready. But I was about to find out what was really going on. I sat there, staring at the email, the invitation still glowing on my screen. Regional Director. It sounded so official. I ran my fingers over the words like they might disappear if I wasn't careful. I'd been promoted in secret. Hell, I'd kept it a secret from Jessica on purpose. The plan was to surprise her at the party. I thought I'd be walking in with a smile, ready to take on this new role. But now it felt like the whole thing had turned into some twisted game I hadn't been prepared to play. I skimmed through the details of the event, my eyes catching on a few key things. The party was bigger than I expected. They were treating it like an all-hands affair. Executives, leadership, everyone from the company. And then I noticed Jessica's department was listed as being invited. Marketing. Of course, her department would be there. But the way it was written, like it was an exclusive thing, made me feel like something else was going on. Something I didn't know about. I sat back in my chair, my hand tightening around the mouse. I needed to know for sure. I grabbed my phone and dialed the company's HR department, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Good evening, this is Rachel from HR. How can I help you?" Cleared my throat. "Hey, this is Steve Harris. I'm the new regional director. I just wanted to confirm the details for tomorrow night's celebration." "Oh, Mr. Harris, we're so excited to have you attend. We've been looking forward to introducing you to everyone. Yes, the event is tomorrow night at 7. You'll be seated with the executive team. We've got you in a prime spot right up front." "Great," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "And can you confirm that Jessica's department, marketing, is attending?" "Yes, absolutely. Marketing is a big part of the event. Ms. Harris is on the list, of course." "Good to know." I paused. "I'd like to sit near them. For the announcement. The surprise. I mean." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll make sure you're close to marketing. We can't wait for the big reveal. Thanks, I said, hanging up without another word. I was left with the quiet hum of the house again, the weight of everything settling in. I was about to walk into that room tomorrow night, right into Jessica's world. The world she'd been keeping from me. I walked over to the closet, pulling out the dark gray suit I'd set aside for the event. It was nice, a little more formal than I usually wore, but I wanted to make a statement. I hung it up, smoothing out the wrinkles with my hands, the fabric cool under my fingers. For a second, I just stood there, my mind racing. The tension was suffocating. There were so many things I needed to figure out, so many things I didn't understand. But tomorrow night I would. Tomorrow night, everything would come to light. I laid the suit out on the bed, the tie next to it, a sharp contrast to the mess in my head. I was supposed to be excited, right? This was a huge career move. But all I could think about was Jessica. The way she'd sounded on the phone. The way she'd asked me not to come to the party. The way she never mentioned my promotion, my surprise promotion. It was all starting to feel like a setup. Like I was the last person to know what was really going on. I ran my hands through my hair and sank down onto the edge of the bed, staring at the suit. Tomorrow night wasn't just a celebration of my new role. It was going to be a reckoning. A moment where everything I'd ignored for months was going to crash down on me, whether I was ready or not. And I wasn't sure I was ready, but I didn't have a choice. I was going to that party, and I wasn't leaving until I knew the truth. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, the knot in my stomach pulling me awake, like I was already bracing for something. The events of the previous night were gnawing at me. Jessica's strange request, her avoidance of the promotion, the way she talked about Carl like he was just another colleague. I needed answers. So, I did what any guy would do when he's trying to figure out what's really going on. I started digging. I opened my laptop and Googled Carl's name. He wasn't hard to find. His LinkedIn profile popped up first, and I scrolled through it slowly, feeling like I was stepping into something I wasn't supposed to see. Carl had been hired recently, about 6 months ago, a position in the same department Jessica worked in. She'd mentioned he was just consulting, but I knew enough about corporate hiring practices to understand that consulting was a fancy way of saying, he's probably got a full-time spot now. It wasn't the timeline she'd given me, not by a long shot. I kept digging. There were mentions of him in company newsletters, photos at company events where he was standing side by side with Jessica. And every single one of them made my stomach twist a little tighter. But it was the little things, the odd details that kept getting to me. Carl and Jessica had started taking lunch together, a lot. Too much, in fact. She'd never told me about it, and I couldn't remember the last time she came home from work and said anything about him. She always kept it brief, like it was nothing more than casual. And late-night meetings, always with Carl. When I asked her about them, she'd shrug it off. Just work, she'd say. We're on the same projects. But I couldn't shake the feeling that just work wasn't what was happening here. I switched tabs, and then, without thinking too much about it, I dialed HR. I'd worked with the company long enough to know who to call for info like this. Rachel, the same woman I'd spoken to the night before, picked up after a few rings. HR, this is Rachel. How can I help you? Hey, Rachel, it's Steve Harris, I said, trying to sound casual. I'm looking for a little more info about Carl Henderson. Can you confirm when he started with the company? There was a slight pause. Oh, sure. Let me pull up his file. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers on the desk, my mind racing. I could hear the faint click of keys in the background. Okay, she said after a moment. Carl started about 6 months ago, as you know, but he's been moving up pretty quickly, especially in marketing. He's working closely with Jessica right now. They're practically attached at the hip. Attached at the hip. My chest tightened, the words ringing in my ears. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the unease creeping through me. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just wanted to make sure I had the timeline straight. Appreciate it. I hung up and sat there, staring at the screen. Everything Rachel had confirmed. His quick rise. The way he and Jessica were close at work. felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to put together. But I had no choice. I was in too deep now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, and ran my fingers through my hair. This wasn't just about my promotion anymore. This was about something else entirely. Jessica had been lying, and I'd been too blind to see it. The realization hit me hard. I had spent the last few months trying to brush off the things that felt off. Her late nights, the way she would get defensive when I asked about Carl. I had told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid, that she was just busy with work. But now, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how foolish I'd been. I couldn't pretend anymore. She'd been pulling away for a reason, and it wasn't because of work stress. I took a deep breath, staring at the glowing screen in front of me. My mind was spinning, a mix of disbelief and anger. How long had this been going on? How long had I been kept in the dark? I pushed back from the desk, my chair scraping against the floor. The tension in my body was unbearable. Everything I thought I knew about Jessica, about our marriage, was starting to feel like a lie. I wasn't sure what to do with that. What was I supposed to do now? But one thing was clear. I wasn't walking into that party tomorrow night as just a guy with a new job. I was walking in with the truth in my hands, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. Jessica might have thought she could hide whatever was going on with Carl, but she couldn't hide from me forever. Tomorrow night, everything changed. The morning of the party, everything felt off. Jessica was in the kitchen, moving around in a way that felt frantic. She was already dressed, wearing a dress that looked, well, out of place. It wasn't that it was bad, but it wasn't the usual polished, professional look I was used to seeing her in. This dress was too casual, almost like she was trying too hard to be effortless. And she was wearing a shade of lipstick I'd never seen her wear before, something darker than usual. The whole combination made her seem like she was trying to hide something, like she was covering up nerves with a new appearance. I was sipping my coffee, pretending to be engrossed in the morning routine, but I was watching her closely. She wasn't acting like herself. "You're looking good," I said, trying to sound neutral. "That dress is a bit different for the office, though. You're sure it's okay for the party?" She glanced over at me, a small smile forming on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's a new look. Thought I'd try something fresh for tonight. To make an impression. It's an important night for me, Steve." Her voice was a little too tight, too rehearsed, like she was putting on a performance. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to ask more, to dig into what she was really up to, but I kept my mouth shut. I couldn't push too hard this early. She was already on edge, and I didn't want to tip my hand just yet. "Yeah, I get it," I said, taking another sip of my coffee. "It's a big deal for you." She nodded, clearly relieved by my lack of questions. But I couldn't ignore the way her hands kept shaking as she picked up her coffee mug, how she kept glancing at the clock, as if she was running out of time. I noticed the little things more now. Her behavior had been different for weeks. She was dressing differently, wearing stronger perfume, and being strangely quiet when I asked about her day. She'd get defensive whenever I mentioned Carl, too, which only made me more suspicious. I knew she wasn't being honest with me. "You've been working late a lot this past month," I said casually, watching her closely. "All the prep for tonight?" "Yeah," she said quickly, grabbing her purse and tossing it over her shoulder. "It's been a crazy few weeks, but you know how it is. Big presentation, big expectations." Her eyes flickered as she said it, her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. And it wasn't just about the party anymore. I could see it in the way she was avoiding my gaze, how tense she was in her movements. There was something more, something I wasn't supposed to see. I pushed back from the table, setting my empty mug down, trying not to let the frustration show on my face. "You leaving now?" She nodded, checking her watch again. "I have to get there early to help set up. The event doesn't start until 7, but there's always a lot to do before it kicks off." She was rushing through her words now, avoiding my eyes. I frowned. "I thought you were just helping with the setup. You said you'd be done by 6. "I'll be fine," she said quickly, gathering her things. "It'll be good to get there early. Help things run smoothly, you know?" She shot me an overly bright smile, but it felt forced. I watched her as she grabbed her keys from the counter, her movements too fast, too purposeful. Everything about her felt off, like she was trying to control something that was slipping out of her grasp. I wasn't stupid. She was already trying to cover her tracks. "Okay," I said, trying to sound supportive, even though my gut was screaming at me. "I'll see you there, then." She barely glanced back as she walked out the door, the click of the locks echoing in the empty house. I stood there for a moment, still processing everything I'd just seen and heard. The party was hours away, but I could feel the weight of it already. Something was going on, something I wasn't part of, and I was done pretending I didn't notice. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the suit I'd laid out the night before. The tightness in my chest didn't ease as I slipped on the jacket, smoothing it down with a hand that wasn't shaking, but definitely felt like it wanted to. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar, and for the first time, I realized just how much this night meant. It wasn't just about my promotion or even Jessica's weird behavior. It was about the truth. I wasn't going to let her pull me into whatever lie she was spinning. I was going to that party tonight, not as a guest of honor, but as someone who was about to figure out what had been happening behind my back. This wasn't just about showing up in a new role. This was about showing up for myself and finding out exactly what was going on with Carl. I arrived at the event just as the lobby filled with people in expensive suits and the sound of polite chatter bounced off the high ceilings. The buzz of excitement was there, but it felt distant, like I was on the edge of it all, looking in. I tried to focus on the faces around me, familiar ones from work, people I had been introduced to during my interview process, but tonight my mind was elsewhere. My eyes kept scanning the room, looking for Jessica, looking for Carl. I was greeted by a few of the senior leadership team, and they ushered me through to the executive table, where I was introduced as the new regional director. It was all smiles and handshakes, but I could barely concentrate on the words they were saying. My attention kept drifting, and it wasn't long before I spotted Jessica and Carl across the room. They were standing by the bar, talking with some other colleagues. As I watched them, my stomach twisted. Carl was standing a little too close to her, his hand resting casually on her lower back as they talked. It wasn't anything overt, just little gestures that didn't belong in a professional setting. The way Carl leaned in when he spoke, the way Jessica laughed at something he said, her body angled toward him in a way that was more personal than casual. I felt like I was drowning in the weight of it. My hands tightened around the stem of the wine glass I'd been given, and I had to remind myself to breathe. They looked like they were in their own world, like no one else was even in the room. And that's when it hit me, sharp and cold. There was something going on between them, something more than just work. The event was moving forward in the usual corporate fashion. Speeches, small talk, people exchanging business cards, but none of it mattered. My eyes were locked on Jessica and Carl. They kept glancing at each other across the room, their smiles more intimate than anything that had a place in this kind of setting. Carl's hand brushed Jessica's arm as they spoke, and she didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into the touch, as if she was comfortable, as if this was normal. Couldn't look away. Every time their eyes met, I could feel it in my chest. A sickening tightness that made me want to do something, anything, to break the spell they were under. But I stayed seated, forcing myself to focus on the conversation happening around me. The introductions kept coming, the conversation flowed, but in my mind, there was only one thing that mattered now. I was no longer part of the world I thought I knew. The formal introductions began. I stood when my name was called, walking to the front of the room with the kind of smooth professionalism I'd seen in the leaders before me. I was introduced as the company's new regional director. Polite applause followed, but it was nothing more than a backdrop to the storm building inside me. As I stepped up to the microphone, I saw Jessica's face. She was standing by the table, looking directly at me, her eyes wide. The shock was written all over her face. She hadn't expected me to be introduced. Her mouth parted slightly, like she was struggling to make sense of what was happening. Carl wasn't far behind her, and when our eyes met, his expression betrayed a flicker of surprise, just enough for me to know he hadn't anticipated this either. But there was something else, something that lingered in the way he glanced at Jessica. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, or maybe it was just plain surprise. Either way, it was clear that none of this was part of the plan. I cleared my throat and began my speech, keeping my voice steady, calm. I didn't need to say much, just the usual corporate niceties. Thank you. I'm excited to be here, looking forward to working with everyone. But all the while, I was laser-focused on Jessica's reaction. Her face had gone pale, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she shifted uncomfortably where she stood. I gave a few more thanks, nodded to the team, and wrapped it up quickly. But inside, my mind was racing. Jessica wasn't just shocked. She was panicked. And Carl couldn't meet my gaze for more than a split second before turning away, trying to pretend he wasn't a part of this mess. I finished the speech with a polite smile, but I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at them, at Jessica, who was now standing frozen, unable to mask the unease in her posture, and at Carl, who was trying to act like he hadn't just been caught in a lie. As I took my seat, I realized that tonight wasn't about the promotion. It wasn't even about the company or the celebration. It was about the truth. And the truth was standing right in front of me. The applause faded quickly, but the weight of the room didn't. I could feel the tension, thick and suffocating. Jessica's face went pale the moment I finished speaking, and I watched as her eyes darted to Carl. His expression mirrored hers. Shock, disbelief, maybe even a little panic. I didn't need to look any closer to know they hadn't planned for this. I sat back down, my hands steady, but my mind racing. The polite chatter of the crowd continued, people engaging in small talk like everything was normal, but the unease in the air was impossible to ignore. I could feel their eyes on me, but it was Jessica and Carl I couldn't stop watching. They didn't even attempt to hide their discomfort as their gazes met again. I was certain now, they hadn't expected this. They didn't know I was part of the company's plans, and I couldn't help but relish the way the truth was starting to unravel in front of me. I stood, excusing myself from my table as I made my way toward the marketing team, casually weaving through the crowd. The conversations around me felt like muffled noise. I wasn't listening. I wasn't even pretending to care. My focus was laser-sharp on Jessica and Carl, sitting at a table near the back, talking to a few other colleagues. Jessica was fidgeting with her glass, glancing around like she was trying to figure out how to escape. Carl looked like he was trying to disappear. His usual confident demeanor had shrunk, his shoulders tight as he leaned back in his chair. He caught sight of me before Jessica did. I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his body tensed up. The man had no idea how to handle this. He had no idea how to look me in the eye. I walked over slowly, taking my time. I wasn't rushing this. Every step felt deliberate, like I was walking through a moment that was too big to let slip by. I made small talk with a couple of colleagues along the way, nodding and smiling, but all the while, my eyes never strayed from them. When I finally reached their table, I could see it in Jessica's face. She was struggling to recover. The tension between her and Carl was thick, and it felt like the air had gone cold. "Steve," Carl said first, awkwardly standing up to greet me. His handshake was stiff, his grip just a little too tight, like he was trying to project some kind of control that wasn't there. "Congratulations on the promotion," he added, his voice a little too calm. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks, Carl," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's good to finally be in the same department, huh?" His eyes flicked to Jessica before he nodded, trying to hide the discomfort that was flooding his face. "Yeah, definitely," he said quickly, as if it was just another normal day at work. But we both knew it wasn't. I turned my attention to Jessica, who had barely moved. She was sitting stiffly, her hands clenched together on the table. She looked up at me with that same tight smile, but I saw the shift in her eyes, the way they darted between Carl and me, trying to mask her panic. "Jessica," I said, nodding at her, trying to keep things casual. "How are you? I'm sure you've been busy with the preparations." She forced a smile, her voice shaking just enough for me to notice. "Yeah, it's been a lot, but it's worth it. Big night for the company, right?" Right? I replied, taking in her every word. She was trying so hard to keep her cool, but it was clear she was rattled. The cracks were starting to show. We stood there for a moment, a strained silence between us, before I finally broke it with a quiet, "Well, I'll let you two get back to your night." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, but not without feeling their eyes follow me. There was no going back now. The game was up. They both knew it. As I made my way back to the executive table, the weight of the moment settled over me. Jessica's discomfort, Carl's awkwardness. It was all out in the open now. They weren't fooling anyone. And as I sat back down, I couldn't help but think that things were never going to be the same between any of us. The truth had come to light, and there was no pretending anymore. The night had only just begun. But for me, the real party had already started. I couldn't sit there any longer watching them squirm. The polite conversation felt like a mask, and I was done pretending. I stood up slowly, ignoring the curious glances from around the room, and turned back toward Jessica and Carl. They both looked up at me like I was about to do something unpredictable, which, in a way, I was. I walked over, deliberately slow, and stood in front of their table, feeling the weight of their stares. Neither of them spoke, but I could see the tension in their bodies. Jessica's hands were still clenched tightly on her glass, her knuckles white. Carl was avoiding eye contact, looking at the table like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. "Jessica," I said, my voice low and steady, "we need to talk. About Carl." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, she froze. Her eyes darted to Carl, then back to me. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "What do you mean? There's nothing to talk about." I didn't flinch. "You've been telling me about late-night meetings, late work hours, about how you and Carl have been spending so much time together. But I've been listening, Jessica. I've been paying attention, and I know the truth." Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she was going to burst into tears. But instead, she quickly tried to cover it up, forcing a nervous laugh. "Steve, this isn't what you think. We've been—" "Don't," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm. "I know about the dinners, the late hours. I know about the way you and Carl act around each other. You've been lying to me, and it's time to stop pretending." Carl shifted in his seat, his face flushed. "It's not what you think," he stammered, his usual confidence completely gone. He glanced at Jessica, and then back at me, his voice cracking. "We were just working together. That's all." I looked directly at him, my gaze unflinching. "Don't lie. We both know there's more to it. Don't pretend like this is just about work. You think I don't see it? The way you two can't keep your hands to yourselves? How you talk about each other like no one else matters." Carl's eyes shifted to the floor. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but no words came out. His face was pale now, his earlier composure completely gone. "I have everything I need to expose this," I said, my voice steady and cold. "All the late nights, the private meetings, the way you two have been tiptoeing around the truth. None of it's a coincidence, is it? So here's the deal. Either you both come clean right now or I make this public. I'll go to HR. I'll expose the affair, and I'll make sure the company knows exactly what's been going on behind the scenes." Jessica's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw her mask crack. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked like she might break down right there. Her voice shook as she finally spoke. "Steve, I'm sorry, okay? But our marriage, it wasn't working. She choked on her words, her face a mess of guilt and regret. "Carl and I, it just happened. We've been working together so closely, and I don't know how it went this far. But it's not your fault, okay? I didn't mean for it to hurt you. We've been having problems for a while." I didn't flinch. I didn't move. My eyes stayed locked on hers, and I could feel my blood boiling under the surface. I had spent years ignoring the signs, telling myself everything would work out, that it was just work stress or some phase she was going through. But now I knew the truth. "You're right," I said, my voice low. "It's not my fault. It's yours. and Carl's. I turned to Carl, who was still staring at the table like he was hoping it would swallow him whole. You've got two options, Carl. You resign quietly, or I go to HR and make this a whole lot uglier for both of you. Carl's eyes flickered up to mine, panic in his face. He opened his mouth but shut it quickly, then nodded stiffly. I'll resign, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded once, not satisfied, but resigned to the fact that this was how it had to end. I wasn't doing this for her or for him. I was doing this for me. Good, I said. Now get out of my sight. I turned back to Jessica, who was trying, and failing, to keep herself together. Her eyes were glossy, the tears barely held back. Steve, please don't. I raised my hand, cutting her off. No, I'm done with your excuses. I'm done with the lies. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her face crumpling as the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing left to say. I walked away without another word, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me like a brick. I had taken control, but it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end. The next morning, I woke up early, my head heavy with everything that had gone down. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt oppressive, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. I wasn't sure what. I grabbed my phone, still in bed, and scrolled through the missed calls and texts. There were a few from Jessica, mostly apologies. I'm sorry. We need to talk. Please, Steve. The messages piled up, each one more frantic than the last. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't owe her anything right now. Not after everything she'd done. I tossed the phone on the nightstand and got up, making my way downstairs. I knew I had to take care of the fallout, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. First things first, I called HR to process Carl's resignation. The conversation was as professional as it could be, given the circumstances. Thank you for the update, Mr. Harris. The woman on the other end said, her tone neutral. We'll make sure everything is handled. Carl's resignation will be finalized by the end of the day. I felt a small knot loosen in my chest, like something that had been weighing me down was finally being dealt with. But that was just one part of it. The real work, emotionally and professionally, was just starting. By the time I left for the office, I was ready to dive into the next part of this mess. I had a meeting with Terry Franklin, my new boss. He was a straightforward guy, no nonsense. We'd already had a few brief conversations since my promotion, but today was different. Today, I had to figure out how to move forward in my new role without dragging the personal drama along with me. Terry was already in his office when I arrived, his door open as usual. He was hunched over some reports when I knocked lightly on the frame. Steve, he said without looking up. Come on in. I've got a minute. I stepped in and sat down across from his desk. Hey, Terry. I just wanted to touch base with you on a couple of things. He nodded, his expression focused. Sure. What's on your mind? I hesitated for just a moment. There was no easy way to bring it up. But this was my job now. I couldn't let personal matters bleed into my work life. Not after everything that had happened. I want to make sure we're clear on how I'm moving forward here. I don't want any confusion about the direction I'm taking in my new role, especially with everything that happened last night. I kept it vague, not wanting to dive into the specifics. Terry leaned back, finally giving me his full attention. I get it, he said, his voice steady. Look, you've been in the company long enough to know how things can get tricky, especially in leadership positions. But I trust you. This company's in a good place, and you're going to take it even further. Just make sure you keep it professional. I don't need any personal drama affecting the work. I nodded, the words sinking in. That was exactly what I needed to hear. No more distractions. Just focus on the job. After the meeting, I went straight to the attorney's office. It felt surreal, sitting there in that sterile conference room, signing paperwork and discussing what came next. Divorce proceedings weren't something I'd ever imagined myself dealing with, but now it was a reality. The lawyer was efficient, almost clinical in his approach. You're looking at a fairly standard separation, but we can speed things up if we move quickly. If there's no contested property or child custody, we should be able to get this filed within a couple of weeks. I didn't have much to say after that. The reality of it all was sinking in. I was done with the marriage. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything that had built up over the years. The distance, the lies, the silence between us that had grown louder and louder until it was deafening. By the time I got home that night, I had an email from HR confirming Carl's resignation. It was done. He was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen. Part of me expected to feel some kind of relief, but instead, there was only a quiet emptiness. The situation had been resolved, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I clicked off the email and leaned back in my chair. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I wasn't in the dark, not about Jessica, not about Carl. I knew what had been going on, and I wasn't the one being deceived anymore. The next steps were clear. I would move forward with my career, but I'd also move forward with my life. Without Jessica, without Carl. I wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but at least I was in control now. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. 3 weeks had passed since everything had collapsed. Carl was gone, moved out of the city, and Jessica had resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. I had to admit I didn't care much about the details. The divorce papers had been filed. The house was quiet again, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of lies. I'd buried myself in work, throwing myself into my new role. My career was moving forward at full speed, faster than I'd imagined. The promotion had put me on a different path, one that felt like it was meant for me all along. I walked through the office every morning, now greeted by colleagues with respect instead of the occasional side eye. They'd heard about the changes, and I could feel the shift. It wasn't just the promotion. It was the way people looked at me, with an almost renewed sense of professionalism. As I sat at my desk this morning, the weight of the past few weeks didn't feel heavy anymore. It was gone, like a storm that had finally passed. The emotional weight that used to drag me down, Jessica's lies, the betrayal, wasn't there. I wasn't dragging myself through the motions anymore. I was moving forward, confident in the direction I was going. I was free. I paused for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. The sun was setting, casting everything in this soft golden light. It should have been hard. I should have been angry, hurt, confused. But instead, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I spent too long pretending. Pretending my marriage was something it wasn't. Pretending I could fix what was broken. But the truth was, it had been broken for a long time. Now I had control over my career, over my life. I wasn't looking back anymore. The lies that had kept me trapped were gone, and with them the life I used to have. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore, and it felt good. I got up from my desk, walking through the office as the last few people filed out for the day. There was no more pretending, no more discomfort in the air. Just me, moving ahead, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future was mine now, and for the first time I was finally walking it on my own terms.